All right, so I want to start with us kind of taking a very big step back. Our Earth, our home. I'd like to start by grounding us in something that we all share in common. I remember when this photograph was first released in 1969. It was when the first man walked on the moon. I was a child, but it was an incredible moment to see the Earth from this orientation, from this vantage point. So beautiful, so peaceful, so perfect, but also so small, so fragile, and so vulnerable. It struck me then, as it does now, that when something is that precious and that fragile, it demands our care. And that's not eventually, but now, in every single moment. Perhaps the most powerful message of this photograph is that we're all connected. This is our home. This is where we all live. Every child, every adult, in every community, in every country. Every one of us held together on this delicate planet, bound by the same sky, our feet on the same ground, same hopes for the future. That's exactly why it is urgent that we take these steps together in order to be able to build a world that's truly fit for children and for all people. Our world is indeed fragile. We often forget this simple truth. Children are our human continuity. We have the Earth to carry us forward and what we hope will be a better future for everyone. It's hard to imagine when you look at this photo that this is the world where so many challenges threaten our shared future, from conflict to climate shocks to growing inequality. And yes, they threaten all of us, but especially our children. So today I'd like to start a new tradition here, and you can help me. Whenever and wherever you are, when you begin a meeting, talk at a conference, speak at a small gathering, I'd like you to share a photograph of our Earth. It reminds us more clearly that we're one human family with one fragile home, seeing it whole. Seeing it from this perspective makes us feel differently. So thank you, and I hope you will take that as a challenge for a new tradition. So with that, we begin our journey together today. As the conference title suggests, yes, I'm going to talk about local governance, but I'm not going to focus on it solely. I'm going to talk about some other things that we need to attend to that are critical if we are to have local governance, really be paying attention to the fact of how important local governance is. So we're going to take a little journey together. I like to use metaphors and visuals and pictures, so I have this one because we're going to be going up some hills, down into some valleys, and the train is actually there because it is symbolic, because we're going to be talking about switch points, which is related to trains and how they set new directions. So I'm going to be using the metaphor of switch points throughout our time together to help us think about actions we can take to advance early childhood development. If you don't know what a switch point is exactly, it's the little movable rails that allow trains to be guided from one track to another to change their direction. They are moved to align with either a straight track or a diverging track, which depends on the desired path of the train. And here is where I really, really need you to invest in this metaphor. When a switch point is activated, it shifts the entire train to a different track. The train is massive, the momentum is heavy, but that tiny shift, that tiny change, shifts everything. Our early childhood systems are a little bit like that train, built over time, strong momentum, but when the world changes, and it has, we must be brave enough. We must have the courage enough to activate a switch point and to make a change. I'm only going to talk about 3 critical areas today where we can begin to activate switch points, but there are so many. As you listen to the presentation, perhaps you'll have your own ideas about which switch points for ECD that you can activate in your early childhood program, or your agency, or your community, or your government ministry, or your nation. There are some key questions we have to ask ourselves. What's the overall environment for early childhood development today? Looking back over the last 25 years, what have we missed? What conditions have we overlooked or underestimated? Who are the stakeholders we need to pay more attention to? Who have we left out of the conversations about children, their rights, and their well-being? And perhaps most importantly, who do we need to invite in now that we left out, so that children are not just an afterthought, but a true priority in our societies, woven into our policies, our practices, and our shared cultural values around the world? Let's look at these 3 areas as potential switch points. Creating cultural change, elevating local governance, and building business partnerships. Interestingly, as you will see, neither cultural change, local governance, nor private sector businesses were originally included as part of the core solution to getting attention for ECD in the late 1990s or early 2000s. They weren't highlighted in major global frameworks, but in the real world, we know that number 2, local governments, and number 3, businesses, are often the 2 entities that families interact with on a regular basis. And whether those interactions support or neglect young children often depends on something less visible: creating a culture of care and concern for young children. This is why I want to begin by spending a good bit of my time with you discussing culture, and not culture in the sense of your traditions or those things that you deeply respect, food and wonderful sorts of things that are lovely about each individual culture that we have, our family relationships, etc. But the overall cultural environment that we're creating, and how that can include children. Many of you remember in 2002, over 23 years ago now, it's hard to believe, there was a document released called A World Fit for Children. It was an outcome document adopted by the UN General Assembly at a special session on children, and it focused on the well-being and development of children and reaffirmed those commitments that we made at the 1990 World Summit for Children. I don't know if anybody in the room was at that 1990 World Summit, but if you were, congratulations and thank you for moving all these things forward that we have today. It was established, there were established targets to be achieved by 2010 at that time, and the release of the World Fit for Children, oh gosh, it was such an exciting moment. I really do actually feel quite old now standing up here, I have to say that, because I remember having my little blue and white copy of A World Fit for Children, and I was so proud of it, and it felt as if, it was the declaration we had all been waiting for, and I carried it around. It was like a little map or a moral North Star for all our efforts. And it was helping us to see how we could keep children safe and educated and healthy and heard and protected from war and invested in and not ignored. And it was an amazing moment where we all felt that there was a true global movement for children had been launched. Here on the slide, we see some of the key areas that were covered in the World Fit for Children. And again, having all these pulled together into one unified document at that time, it was actually a really special moment. So putting children first, eradicating poverty, leaving no child behind, caring for every child, educating every child, protecting them from harm, protecting them from war. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Combating HIV/AIDS, listening to children, protecting the earth. Many of us celebrated the World Fit for Children as a new era. Today, we're used to seeing these themes addressed across various frameworks and reports, but in 2002, seeing them all brought together again, it was new. It was like a brand new world to us. So what's happened 23 years later? We've seen early childhood development definitely gain visibility on the global stage. We're visible now, and that's due to all the hard work of so many of you who have participated in conferences and discussions and meetings and dialogues. Thank you to all of you. We are visible. Target 4.2 of the Sustainable Development Goals signaled a watershed moment for formalizing ECD within global education goals. The Nurturing Care Framework of 2018 helped to connect sectors and stimulated conversation about integrated systems, health, education, protection, nutrition, responsive care, the Global Partnership Strategy, the Tashkent Declaration. I mean, these were all wonderful things that have happened, right? And I know many of you know this, and you've worked within this field for many years, but some of you in the room are new. And again, I like to also speak to all of you who are coming into the profession, into the circle of ECD. These are things, if you don't know of them, please look at them. They provide an important foundation for our work. Regional networks like RNEC, AFCAN, ISA, and others have flourished, deepening our knowledge and cooperation across contexts. We've seen countries create multi-sectoral ECD policies. We've seen ECCE action after the 2022 Transforming Education Summit. There have been tangible improvements, increased pre-primary enrollment, reductions in child mortality, gains in nutrition, vaccination, and stunting outcomes. These milestones really reflect important progress, and it's visible, right? We have that visibility, we've captured that visibility, but have we made enough progress to be viable? Yep, have we? What do you think? Are we viable? The ability to sustain momentum and be embedded in how we think about human progress across all of society. Can we sustain our momentum? Are we viable? It's important to consider whether the progress we've made in ECD has been mostly structural or cultural. When we talk about structural change, we're really talking about the policies and the frameworks and the initiatives and the programs we've built to support young children. But we talk about cultural change, we mean something deeper. It's those shared values, those beliefs, those embedded practices and everyday behaviors that shape how societies view and treat children. Have we institutionalized early childhood development, not just in our systems, but in our societies? Not just in our laws and policies, but in the hearts and minds of all people. Each of us comes from different communities and countries, so our answers may vary. But this should be the question that unites us and concerns us. And again, your nation, your community may place children very high priority, but have we done that as a global community? Has attention to young children been fully claimed and owned by all sectors, by society at large, by all people? Are children prioritized in our world? Do we value early childhood teachers and professionals? Is early childhood education part of all formal education systems? Do local governments build plans for cities and communities that give special attention to young children's needs? Everywhere? Do business leaders consider the needs of young children, especially when their business or products directly impact children's lives? Does the entertainment industry include or represent young children appropriately or accurately? Or does it overlook their experiences and their developmental needs? Does it disregard young children's developmental needs? The entertainment industry is an interesting one, right? Because they kind of do their own thing. And they say, well, we're there. You can either buy our product to get our films, watch the TV shows. You have a choice. But they're responsible too. They need to make sensible choices about what children are viewing. There's responsibility on both sides. So are children a part of the culture of our humanity? Are we building structures for ECD, but not attending to embedding children in shared value we hold for our world? From courts to clinics to city councils to climate summits, young children are still too often invisible, spoken for but not centered upon. If we want a world truly fit for children, we must start by seeing them as whole people, now valued by all. Because when after decades of effort, young children are still not visible enough, and their rights and needs are still not at the core, then how can we plan for the future of society? It becomes urgent. Recently, and really disappointingly, in a global policy discussion called the Summit of the Future, and this was a United Nations summit of world leaders, there was a document released called the Pact for the Future. But young children were scarcely even mentioned. Youth and future generations do show up, but the mention of young children isn't there, not the early years. Why? When we're talking about the future, right? Summit of the Future, Pact of the Future, you would think that children would be not only mentioned, but have a special place within that document. The future rests on the shoulder of children. The absence of children in the Pact for the Future mattered, and it said a lot. So we're going to move into our switch points. The first one, as you saw on one of the earlier slides, I want to talk about creating this cultural change, right? And the thing is it's very hard when you do this, because I'm speaking to all the people in the room who have been working so hard and have been doing all the work that needs to be done, and you're taking it on your shoulders. But we need others to get involved as well, to make this permanent, to make that change for children happen. We need others to be involved, and we need the culture to change. Has the ECD movement been really rooted deeply enough into society, into the cultural threads of society, so that it can withstand the political changes, the changing agendas, the shifts in funding priorities, which we're seeing now is a true crisis? Are we talking to each other still, but maybe not focused on engaging all of society? We must ask ourselves, who in our countries is raising their voice for young children other than us? Who is sounding the alarm when budgets are cut other than us? Who is holding governments accountable to their promises other than us? If the answer is, well, there are not many doing this, then we have a major vulnerability. If it's just us, how is this going to be sustainable? How can we move forward without everyone being engaged? And I know I'm calling for something that's quite difficult, right? I understand that. I tend to have very big ideas about things, which is not a bad thing to have big ideas. People need to have big thoughts, right? So I'm calling for something really big. I'm saying the whole world needs to see, respect, and value children, not just some of us, but all of us. We need to bring everyone on board, because without everyone, we're beholden to political tides that change too quickly, and children's development spans much longer than one political term, right? So we need to make sure that we have this set, not for just a short period of time, but for a long, extended period of time. We need the systems we want, resilient, equitable, sustainable. They're not going to come from one sector, one level, one idea. They will come from shared responsibility and a shared culture of dignity and respect for young children as people, as contributors to society. I still have trouble when I'm talking about what I do, right? I go out sometimes and speak, and people say, what do you do? And I say, well, I work for an organization that's concerned with children, and we talk about education and health, and I suddenly find people kind of drifting off, right? They're like, oh, that's interesting, right? Let me move on to something else. It's shameful, really it is, that people should be saying, oh my goodness, you work for an organization that talks about children, and children are so important, right? I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but it's happened to me quite a few times, and it's very concerning. As we reflect on the need for what I call cultural change, we must recognize that it cannot happen in isolation. We need all actors, again, across sectors and settings, to place children at the center. Now, here's something I'm going to say, and I don't want those of you who've been involved in developing statements and declarations and papers and all kinds of things for ECD to be offended. This is not what's intended, but we've had a lot of vision statements and frameworks and initiatives and declarations, and yes, and they're all wonderful, and they were all needed because they were part of the structure, right? They were necessary for that structure that we had to build. But by activating precise and powerful levels of change or switch points, we can ensure that children are embraced and early childhood development is prioritized across nations and communities and embedded in societal culture. So the structure is wonderful. And oh my goodness, not only was I celebrating when I first got my copy of the 2002 A World Fit for Children, but I've celebrated every copy of everything I've been given, all the declarations, all the new initiatives that were happening, executive summaries. Yeah, I read executive summaries. Sometimes I read the whole thing, but I do read executive summaries. They are all great, and we need that as part of the structure, but we've also got to we've got to be paying attention to the cultural shift as well, right? So many of you in your systems change work have seen this. In the ECD field, we obviously began thinking more about systems thinking, systems change, and rightly so. But within these conversations lies a crucial insight that's often overlooked. The cultural and mindset shifts are just as critical as the structural ones. This iceberg model, right, originally developed by Peter Senge, who was a wonderful is a wonderful leader and guru in management, leadership, talked about learning organizations, systems thinking. So this was originally developed by him. But in this slide, the iceberg shows us the events and outcomes, the things we can see. They sit at the tip of the iceberg, right? But just beneath are those patterns and trends that are deeper. The system structures, the mental models, the cultural assumptions that drive everything. We can reform policies, create programs, that's important, but if we don't shift the underlying mental models, how societies perceive children, how they value early childhood, early year professionals, how they prioritize children's needs in governance, media, business, and community life, then the change we make at the surface will be limited and short-lived, and we cannot afford that. We cannot afford short-lived, limited change. When we think about what's happening in the world today, we need to make sure that the changes are lasting, and the word that we all use that begins with the S, sustainable. It's not easy, right, to change culture, whether it's your workplace or your community, broad societal change. It takes time. It requires a multifaceted approach. It involves defining that desired culture that we want, fostering understanding, commitment, implementing the strategies to shift behavior. And yeah, it's said, right, that it takes, I think it's about 3 generations or something to really shift kind of societal thinking. So we need to get to work, I guess, And I know you're working hard. It's hard to think of more work, right? When you're already working so hard. But advocacy is not enough. Some of us answer this question by saying, oh, but we advocate, right? This is something a little bit deeper when we're talking about cultural shifts. And our organization, Childhood Education International, we don't want to just leave you hanging, right? So we are going to be looking at this and hoping to provide a short series of papers on cultural change for early childhood, right, for young children. Shifting the culture for young children, you can all access information about how to make those cultural shifts, right? But here's a few considerations. We've got to define the vision. Not just for ECD programs, ECD policies, ECD practices, ECD systems, but we've got to define the vision we have for children. We've got to assess the present, what's working, what's not. We've got to locate those switch points. And I do want you to be thinking about that. If you are tired of listening to me and need to write, move your hands a little bit, start thinking about the switch points. Where are those points, those levers of change, those switch points that you haven't thought about, that you can start to push on them a little bit to create change? We've got to consistently communicate this vision. We've got to build those strong coalitions. We've got to invite participation. This conference had the theme of local governance. Why? Local governance got left out a bit, and that's a shame. We were very focused in our early days on national governments. We needed to make change in national governments to create the ECD policies, right? We talked a lot about nations and policies, but we weren't talking as much about local governance. But local governance is where the policy meets the implementation. It's very strange that we didn't focus on local governance much earlier, and I'm so glad that this conference has that theme, and I'm really excited about attending the sessions with you. We all know that national ECD policies and systems, none of it matters unless we pay attention to what's happening at the local level, right? And how they adopt and express the policies that support young children. It's the municipality that opens the childhood centres. It's the district officer who funds the teachers and caregivers. It's the local planners who decide if a clinic includes space for early intervention or early stimulation. It's the local council that determines whether young children are included in disaster preparedness plans. It's the mayor's office that can prioritise or overlook young children in budgets and service delivery. This is switch point 2. This is where we can make a change, and this is why we're all here at this conference, because we want to talk about this. We want to focus on local governance. We want this to be a switch point for change for young children. They're responsible for a huge range of ECD-related functions. They plan and coordinate the sectors. They give the budgets, give the allocations to ECD infrastructure. They supervise, they monitor the ECD services quality. But as you know, in many countries, local governments are underpowered. They have mandates, but no budgets. They're responsible but often unsupported. They're closest to the people, but the furthest from the global and national tables where decisions are being made. We need to make sure that local governance voices are heard at national levels. You've seen it happen in your own countries, where sometimes the local knowledge, the local governments, what they're experiencing, maybe isn't listened to. And I know that's not happening with the ministers that we have here. They're all very involved in their local governments. So that's a good thing. But I'm talking very globally, right? The barriers they face are real. And yet local governments around the world continue to cope and try to lead, and where some of the most exciting innovations are happening at the local level, right? And local governments know that, the ones that are really pushing forward these exciting agendas, and you're going to hear more about this. You're going to hear about the innovations that are happening, about the challenges that are being faced, but all those exciting things. And I can't wait, again, to be in these sessions. I am going to enjoy them immensely. Imagine what we could do if we treated local governance not as a weak link, but as a critical switch point for transformation. A way that we could change tracks, prioritize children as people, as critical members of our community. What if we could empower local governments by investing in their capacity, sharing data and their learning, involve them more in global national discussions? We need to be more intentional about sharing these innovations and the ways that local governments hold the key to supporting healthy and well young children. But of course, such a vision without resources remains just that, a vision. If we want local governments to play a transformative role in early childhood, we must develop the mandates and the means to support them. The switch point of resourcing is really important, thinking not just how much we invest in early childhood, but what we mean by that and who invests. And goodness, I feel like I've depressed everyone. I hope not. Are you feeling slightly happy? Slightly energized? Keynote speeches are funny, right? You get to either inspire, or you can talk about the critical challenges and other kinds of things, motivate people. And I thought I was writing the most inspiring, motivational keynote ever, and then when I read it, I was like, ooh, I think I'm going to make everybody sad. So I hope I haven't made you sad, because there's really good news in here. And I hope that if you listen to what I'm saying, you're hearing that good news. And certainly switch points are good news, right? So the shrinking ECD financing is not necessarily a happy slide, right? Donor funder is shrinking, and we do want to talk about it. We can't always talk about the happy things, right? We've got to be realistic. We know that significant things are happening with financing, well, for many important things in our world, but certainly for ECD. So in the 2023 Global Education Monitoring Report, education aid dropped by over 200 million. And keep in mind, some of these statistics are from before what we've just had happen, right? 200 million between 2020 and 2022. And within that shrinking pie, early childhood development continues to receive a little sliver, just 2 to 3% of total education aid. But the truth is, we were already underfunded long before this contraction. The promise of robust donor investment in ECD was never fully realized or fulfilled. And we know that we have the creativity and the energy and the passion to overcome these challenges. We can do it. More recent analysis from 2022 underscores how far we will have to go to provide universal free primary education in low and lower middle income countries by 2030. The annual cost is estimated at 44 billion. Something that's really annoying about that number to me is that we know that there are people who have $44 billion. Where are they? Stepping up to the plate and helping us out, doing all sorts of other things, but not necessarily thinking about young children. And it's not just to the donors, the domestic budgets remain tight as well. There's all kinds of issues, right, going on in our world. So what do we see? It's not a gap, but it's a canyon, and that means we're covering only 11% of the needed investment in low-income countries, 27% in lower middle-income contexts. So it's really critical that we think about this, because we've also seen this sudden dismantling, right? I grew up in the UK and travel there fairly frequently. Most of my family is in the UK, but I live in the US, and I live in Washington, DC. And it's been horrible. It's been horrible to see what is happening in our nation and what's happening to our international development sector. USAID, which we were so proud of, many of us in the country, and I know partnered with many of you, is gone. In a flash, just like that. It was a terrible moment. And I still think that many of us, it's hard to recover from that kind of a shock, right? When so many of us have been so invested in that support that was offered. And not only USAID, we see other nations pulling back, right, their investment as well. We see foundations changing course. Really interesting and disturbing things are happening. But we know that global hits have local impact. Local governments operating with limited resources and growing mandates are under increasing pressure. But what I'm hoping is that you're going to hear at this conference how innovative local governments can be, how inspired they are to do incredible work with limited resources. If we want to really be serious about a world fit for children, we cannot keep asking early childhood services, though, to do more with less. It's really hard. We must match our own ambitions with real resources. And that means not only increasing investment, but rethinking how we conceptualize, structure, and sustain the fundings at local levels. When funding drops, it creates real stress and harm for programs, and that's a big reality. As a sector, we've made some important progress in exploring where innovative financing approaches can happen. We've started talking a lot about that. I think there's a session here at some point on innovative financing. These are good things. We're leaning into some really powerful, wonderful discussions that are going to be important for our entire ECD sector. But our understanding of financing itself needs to evolve as well. Any effort to secure and sustain financing for early childhood must be grounded in a broader, more holistic view, one that considers the overall health of the community, the local economy, and the systems that surround young children. Because financing is not just about raising money, it's about building the conditions that make long-term investment possible and meaningful. So far, we've relied heavily on public sector budgets, which are sadly shrinking, donor support, which is oddly retreating, and we need to keep talking to a variety of donors about ECD, right? It's not just, ECD is not just, there's a term, the flavor of the month, you might know it, but it just means the most popular thing at that moment. It's important all the time. We've relied heavily on households, right, and others to provide for children. So we've looked at public sector budgets, we've looked at all these things. So what now? What do we need to resource differently? We need to find new switch points, especially to serve the needs of these local communities. We need to broaden out who we think of as contributors. Recognize communities are not just beneficiaries, but they're co-creators with us. Bring in the private sector, not just for donations, but for shared leadership. Switch point 3, business partnerships. Some people, when they see this, they kind of feel funny, right? Ooh, business and us, right? Does it work? What about the ethical standpoint? Or businesses, they kind of just want their own thing, right? They want profit. We're doing social good. They're wanting good for themselves. Businesses, though, become essential. And I know that it's not always comfortable to talk about this. Sometimes they feel cold and distanced, but it's really important. Businesses are often very creative, they're innovative, they can think outside of the box. They have to be agile, they're success-oriented. Perhaps we need some of the attributes of business in ECD, right? What can we learn from business and how can they help us? There's so much that business can do and will do, but we have to invite them into our circle. Remember, we didn't include business very early on in discussions around ECD, when ECD sort of shaped as a sector. We didn't invite them to the table. So that's probably why they're not thinking about us, right? They can support the building of childcare infrastructure. They can shape child and family-friendly work policies. They can invest in their communities in child-friendly ways. Businesses rely on people as employees and customers. Young children are the very people who will be the adults interfacing with business in the coming years. They must become child and family-friendly for a variety of reasons, for their own good and for the good of their community. Many of you may be familiar with ESG, or the new sort of movement around environment, social, and governance, making businesses rethink how they interact with our world, how they become a part of social solutions that help people, and how they can support the lives and learning of young children. At CE International, Childhood Education International, we've developed a Center for Business Champions. And we've built this around this very idea, right? That in the early childhood community, we need to learn how to build bridges to the business community and to work together to secure those mutual gains. And when business starts caring about early childhood, guess what happens? Local governments then start seeing businesses as their allies, not just for funding, but for actual resources. Business is another switch point, a place where we can establish a new course, a new direction. We did we have training that we offer in this, how to connect ECD leaders and advocates to business. And we did one recently, and members of our NEC were a part of that. And it was very gratifying. I just met someone on the coffee break who was in that training. And I said, you know, how did it help? And then the big thing is you overcome that barrier, that fear of business, that fear of talking to them. Once you've overcome that, you find that there's a lot that businesses are willing to do. So as we face this sort of crisis, right, in funding and resources for ECD, we do need to turn to business. Not every business will want to work with you. Not every business will be nice to you, right? But we need to be willing to go out there, to meet with them, to talk, to develop plans, and especially use this new ESG, environment, social governance. Many of them are doing environment, focused on environment, or they're focused on governance, but they're not focused on social. You can help them fulfill their plans. A lot of businesses now have to develop an ESG plan. So say to them, I have a way that you can complete the S in social. So thank you for being so patient and present on this journey with me. We've taken a little train ride. We've explored 3 powerful areas where change is possible. The culture area, very, very big, local governance, business partnerships. Many of us have been riding this metaphorical ECD train for years, some of us for decades now, others have joined along the way. And now I believe we've arrived at a new switch point. One track, the straight one, will keep us fragmented, under-resourced, dependent on unstable financing, depending on the same old partners, making structural changes in statements and declarations, but not making deep cultural, societal change, changing the social fabric in ways that we can include and consider the needs of children from all aspects of society. Another way is possible, where local governments are empowered. Businesses and the private sector plays a meaningful role where we embrace a culture that does not treat young children as fragile extras. One switch is small but powerful, and it begins with us choosing it. We need to look around us and decide who has been left out, who didn't we include. That's a great exercise for you to sit down and do together, whether you're working in a ministry, a local agency, an ECD program, all levels. Who have we left out of the conversation? Let's not just rebuild, let's redirect, let's switch tracks, let's create a world where our children that were promised, one that not only is fit for them, but built with them in mind. Can you imagine a world built with children in mind? I'm going to close out on a point, but before I do that, I just want to mention quickly a couple of things that are really important. I came through an airport. I won't mention the city or the airline, but to get here. And my flight got delayed, and I was given, one of those vouchers because I had to stay an extra day somewhere. And they said, oh, we'll give you transportation, and we'll give you a hotel, and, it all sounds lovely, right? And then you end up in this massive sort of crush of about 250 people, right, who I was supposed to be transported with and go to the hotel with and everything. And it was a crush of people, and there were just little buses that were supposed to carry all 250 people, and everybody was trying to everybody's tired, right? Traveled a long way, everybody trying to, get onto these tiny little buses. There were families there, little tiny children, infants. Nobody stepped aside. Nobody said, let the family go first. Let's take care of the children first. So that was a horrifying experience. Then we get to the hotel, finally. A small lobby, oh gosh, I don't even know, 250 people in a tiny little area, about the size of the corner of this conference room. Again, little ones, tired ones, crying ones. Nobody did anything. I'm sort of a lone voice trying to say, let them through, let them through. Nobody's listening to me. And it just gave me pause to think, no, no, no. This cannot be the way that we live as a human society. It is not right. We've all worked so hard, right, in our professions, and yet this is still what we see? Terrible. And I'll make one other comment that may not be popular. We have so much conflict and war in our world. And at a certain point, we developed international conventions to ensure that children, as much as possible, would not be harmed. What's happened to that? Are we moving children out of the way, trying to get children into safer places when there's war? No, our world leaders don't seem to be very interested in that anymore. So many children. Everywhere, many places, not just the popular places we hear about on the news, but in many places, children, not safe, not protected. I'm going to, believe it or not, I'm going to leave you with a message of hope. But the message of hope doesn't sound like a message of hope. I'm beginning to think I need serious counseling to know the difference between unhappy and happy. When things fall apart. Heart Advice for Difficult Times by a woman named Pema Chödrön. So I recently read this book. I was having a bit of a challenging moment, and I said, I need to read something. And for some reason, somebody recommended this, which didn't sound to me like it was going to be very helpful. But its wisdom actually seems particularly relevant in this time. Yes, we're all facing challenging times. In our nations, in our world, we see increased violence, the war, the conflict, diminishing resources, the rise of selfish ambitions among some of our world leaders. We've been through pandemics, environmental crises, conflicts, disruptions of many kinds. It's not easy, and it's very easy to be disheartened and fearful. But here's the truth. You are a switch point. You are the fourth switch point. Pema Chödrön emphasizes that you actually have the power to be fearful, to retreat, or to embrace fear as a lesson. Chödrön explains that most of us, we don't like uncomfortable situations. We don't want them really to be lessons. We hate them with a passion. And despite the situation we're in, instead of pushing back out of fear and uncertainty and change, we must accept those feelings we are having and realize that nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. Nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know, until we have received the lesson. When we are faced with discouraging times, we must ask, will we close down or will we open up? Will we grow resentful and bitter or will we become wiser? If we shut down, we've missed the moment to take the next step forward. Chödrön put it so beautifully. We can be penetrated by ours or turn them into flowers. We need to have confidence in our basic wisdom deep down. We know what is right, we know what is important, and we know how to make it right and lasting. So thank you so much for listening to me.